Welcome back to Kintsugi Heroes, helping people tell the stories they need to share so you can find the stories that you need to hear. In this episode, John Millam is joined by Darren Wagner, whose journey spans military childhood, work as a first responder, and personal battles with trauma and depression. After years as a paramedic and police officer, Darren faced profound struggles, including PTSD and loss of identity. Moving between countries and overcoming personal pain, he discovered the value of sharing stories and peer support. Today, Darren uses his lived experience and living experience to help others, showing how compassion, honest conversations, and community can turn adversity into hope and healing. Enjoy this episode with Darren Wagner.
Thank you so much, Kintsugi Heroes. Welcome again to another Kintsugi Heroes podcast, and thank you for joining us today. We're back on our Stories That Matter path, and I'm always reluctant. I'm a little hesitant to do the bio. I always think it like I don't need to advertise your story, right? I don't need to preface it. Of all the people in the world, you're the one who has the most understanding and the most meaning around sort of introducing your story. So, Darren Wagner, thank you so much. A man of learning, of incredible influence, has made significant impact in education training and spreading the word around changing the conversation from, say, the pathology of trauma and the pathology of grief and upset into the efficacy of what that does, lived and living experience and so on. And so I'm fascinated to talk to you today, Darren Wagner. Thanks for joining Kintsugi Heroes.
John, thank you. And thank you to all of our Kintsugi Heroes. I think when I first heard of Kintsugi Heroes, it was such an inspiration. It was an art form or a philosophy that I wasn't aware of until about 5 or 6 years ago, because I did use that term broken quite a bit when I look back at my story. And as you said, look, and I really love the fact that you said lived and living experience. It's something that I've been trying to get into this language when we talk about mental health and people living with challenges. A lived experience often may mean that it's something that I have had in the past and overcome. For many of us, currently, I'm learning to live with that depression. I will be very honest, is that I have a history of suicidality, which has brought me a lot of grief over the years and brought me a lot of positive experiences that I couldn't have imagined, because I just couldn't have imagined that wanting to end the pain, not so much the life. And I think, I've heard many, many people say that, and I think even including yourself, is around that we reach a place that we just don't know if we can go on in that space. So I've had the great pleasure of getting to look back at my story, because I think we all think we know our story until we stop and get a chance to pause and look back and go, well, who actually wrote that story for us? Was that me that authored that, or was that my father that told me that, well, you're going to be a Rabbitohs fan, or you're going to be, you vote for this political party, you're in this church. What is that story that was written for us that we do take on as an identity? So it's been really a great journey and adventure in working out what is my story. I don't know. It's still being written, and with a little bit of time and compassion, opportunities such as this, you get to look back and go, well, which parts do I agree with? Which parts don't fit anymore? And what parts do I want to go back and actually re-author? Going, I know that's what was said about me, but actually it doesn't fit who I am now, and I'm going to rewrite that. And I'm really bad with English language. Now, my wife is a creative writer. She would be horrified if I tried to write anything down with words. that me and the English language, we don't gel well, but I can talk. But it's knowing your story is really, really important. Mine is unique, as all of ours is. It's just the fact that I get an opportunity to step into a spotlight such as this to share. Where do I start? If this is a trauma-informed podcast, which I know that it is I can be honest from a very trauma-informed way on this podcast, and I will be honest with you and the audience. I'm an American. Don't hold it against me. We won't go into talking about politics. That's one trauma that I won't broach in this conversation. I can't explain, even though I work in mental health. I will absolutely not talk about or try to explain what's going on in the States. That being said, I was born there. I grew up in the military. My father was in the Air Force. So we got to do a lot of traveling, which as a child, it was really hard to make friends, really hard to connect with people. You're always moving. Looking back at that story, I had a great opportunity that a lot of people, and especially Americans, didn't get. So I actually got to live in Iran, where many Americans will never get to see again. So I was there as a young child right before the Iranian Revolution. So some of my earliest memories really are being in a beautiful country with beautiful multicultural people, beautiful land, beautiful food, and then having an awareness of political unrest and revolution. So it was because of the revolution that we were forced to move back to America before they actually took over the American embassy in Tehran. So that was my first 3 years. From kindy to year 3 was living in an amazing Islamic community. And then going back to America and it was to wake up in a beautiful culture and hearing the wake up prayers and evening prayers coming out over the mountains. It was special. But then as a child to understand what hate and prejudice is, to go back to America, and because the Iranians had taken Americans hostages, it was really the first time that I'd heard people talk about my friends, which were Iranian fellow students, that we should go bomb them. We should go and bomb the country. And it was really my kind of an awakening that there can be real prejudice and hate in the world. So we skip forward many years ahead. I wanted to become an actor. I can put that out there. So I love the opportunity to be on stage. But as a teenager, my parents separated, and I was sent back to a very rural community where acting wasn't welcomed. There was no opportunity to be on stage. So I did like anyone in my family would, and that would be join the military. However, I had the misfortune of having a bad knee. Now, that bad knee set me on another career path going, well, military is not in your cards. That's just not going to happen. So the next thing that I did was as a volunteer fireman. So you'll notice my bookshelf back there. Those are my toys. They were my childhood toys. Then they eventually became my adult vehicles. So I started out as a volunteer fireman, paramedic. And then the top shelf there is 10 years as a law enforcement officer.
That's an amazing, drive to and the parallels of it, right? Well, do you know why that was a good choice for you? Did you feel it was because of lack of other acceptable options, or do you think it was something that you were drawn to anyway? Right.
Look, I think that's a great question, John. It's look, we all are drawn to something. We have to work. But I saw myself repeatedly over and over finding myself as a crossing guard, lollipop ladies for our Australian audience in that space, if that's still an appropriate term. And if it isn't, I do apologize. I try to be the master of appropriate
we all
language.
know what it means.
I'm always learning.
So,
I'm always learning. So, when I was in 6th grade, I was actually the crossing guard. So I would take the little sign out, and I was always the lifeguard. I was always the helper.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it seemed to be a natural fit to go from one career into the next, different opportunities. And I really loved the opportunity to be with people in usually very traumatic or challenging situations. So I really enjoyed getting onto the scene, helping to be able to, with whatever tool or instrument or whatever was in my vehicle, whatever was on my belt, what is it that I can do to
Yeah.
help ease that pain or suffering of others? So I don't think that I was aware of it at the time, that I did see this from one career to the next. Was it a good career choice? Well, after about 12 years of law enforcement and seeing and having to do things that weren't probably healthy and not
Yeah.
having good self-care practices in place, those things take a toll on our body and our mind. So it was that hopelessness of not being able to help so many people that started to weigh on me heavily. And then receiving a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, which I like to now actually refer to as a moral injury. This was something that happened to
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
on the job. Yeah, it was a moral injury. And without supporting people in those kind of careers and workforces, it's inevitable for a lot of people. So I found
Yeah.
myself pretty hopeless in that space. And it made sense to actually look at possibly ending that pain.
Do you think the moral injury element is a form of, like, some form of emotional dissonance, like the idea that you have there's a values disconnect, right? You're like, in some way we're being, we're in the concept of service is driving us, but service is actually not always what the outcomes are, right? Is that, do you think that, like, it's so many people in first responders and emergencies, they have that outcome, right? And there must be something that creates that sort of conflict in some way.
Oh, okay, absolutely. And this is, I think, what draws my passion, and I'll get to that eventually. Why I'm doing the work that I'm currently doing was that I was aware that the service had let me down. I felt that I had let myself down. I let the community down. I was of no service. I was told by my psychiatrist that I would never work again. So 30 years ago, I was told, you will never work again. You will always be on antipsychotics. My first, yeah. Oh, there's so much positive in that one sentence that is inspiring.
Yeah, inspire me, healer. Right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Oh my goodness. Those and because I didn't know any better, you are the mental health professional. I assumed you went to school. Why wouldn't I believe that? I can't challenge it because I had no other reference point. So it made perfect sense to go, well, my life is going to be always on antipsychotics, never be able to work, which for me was something I just couldn't even imagine not being in a service. It was written right on my police car there, to serve and protect. And now both of those things are going to get stripped from me. And then that was my identity. So you live and breathe. I was seen as, everyone knew me as a canine officer. I taught in the public schools. I parked my police cruiser in my front driveway. It was a very rural community. Everybody knew where I lived. It was no secret. But to have that stripped away from you and then be known as someone with a mental disease,
my goodness,
was and now a mental and then a mental patient. So it was a hospitalization because I did want to end my life, and I did make that attempt. It made perfect sense at the time, and it was interrupted by a fellow friend who was a police officer. It just happened out of the blue to drop by. So I know that opportunity, I shouldn't probably be here. There's probably a sliding door moment somewhere that I couldn't. So I was mad for weeks, months, now that I have to live. I was really, really upset that now I have to live, and what does that look like, and what does that mean? So, long story short, in mental health, we have a way of avoiding pain. And I met my current wife, who was Australian. We met online, and she said, "You need to come to Australia." And in classic avoidance, I looked at the map and I went, okay, I don't know nothing about Australia. The American public school system let me down. Usually geography, when you're growing up in the military, the only geography that I really knew was countries that we had gone to war with or places that we had bombed.
Yeah.
So that was kind of how I looked at my geography. So I'm like, Australia, I had no reference. This is pre-Paul Hogan. This is, so no Crocodile Dundee, no Sydney Olympics. We had no idea. So I did have to apologize and say, look, I don't know whether you have electric, running water. I don't know what kind of government you have, if any. But I think looking at the globe, I think that's about as far away as I can get from my traumas.
Certainly had that going for it. Right?
Look, exactly. Look, it was either that or join NASA, which was also, but I thought, no, my physical, I would never make it. If I couldn't make it in the military.
Not with a dodgy knee. Not with a...
No, not with a dodgy knee.
Yeah. But you were lucky you didn't end up in Austria, right? So that... Yeah.
Well, look, and for a lot of Americans, again, especially when we can't spell properly. So I do know of another American who actually, she auditioned for a Broadway musical because I'm a big fan of theater. And that was literally what happened to her. She thought she was coming to Austria. Luckily, my wife did explain to me that it was Australia. And we talked quite a bit about that. The thing that I didn't realize is that Qantas allows you to bring 2 checked bags. But the thing that they don't advertise at the airport is I was allowed to bring as much emotional baggage as I wanted on the plane with me. So I brought all of that. Yeah, no charge. Yeah. So anyone that's watching, look, if you're worried about emotional baggage and going on overseas trips, don't. It doesn't count, but you can take as much of it as you want.
Doesn't have an extra baggage charge.
No. Qantas, you've got to give them credit. You've got to give them credit. So when I arrived, and then eventually I did realize that I brought that with me. And so then I worked through it, built a beautiful life here. And then my wife said, wouldn't it be amazing for us to go back to the States and give our 2 children who were eventually born here? So we wound up having 2 sons, born here in Sydney, giving them an American experience. So I went, you know what? I think we should. So we spent about a year looking at one of the safest places in America. So my wife was very worried about violence, gun culture. So we located a little community in Connecticut. It was called Newtown, but it wasn't even Newtown. It was a little village outside of Newtown called Sandy Hook. Now, sadly, unfortunately, it's a word that most people shouldn't know. 12 years ago, it was something that the world had never heard of this place. Thank goodness. It was a beautiful, quintessential New England, Norman Rockwell, New England town. They hadn't had a murder in 20-some years. We checked the crime statistics.
Did you research?
My wife, amazing research to protect our children, as we do as parents, going, look, let's find the safest place. It's very rural, remote, lovely community, only 45 minutes to New York City. So you've got all of that going on for you. And it was home. So we reinvented ourselves again. After 2 years, felt really settled, part of the community. And then one morning received a text that there had been a school shooting. The kind of thing that you don't imagine ever, not in that location and not anywhere really. You just go, this can't be happening. And so my rational brain went, okay, I'm a police officer. That's a false report. So that's just some deer hunters been spotted around the school. That can't. So I'm trying to make excuses until my son, who was at school, texted me and had given me some of the news. So I was in the loop well ahead of CNN. So we knew about an hour before it was being reported on the news. The schools went into lockdown. Thank goodness, he survived that day. But we're always changed. So as a community, as a nation, we were changed. It was a numbing, horrific event that, to this day, there's no explanation other than people have. This was a very troubled young man who didn't have mental health support and access to a high capacity weapon. So a really bad mixture. We spent the next 2 years in Washington, D.C., as a parent, that's not okay. So I became the public face for our community. So I came out to our police officers and said, look, you know me as the community photographer. I'm also an ex-cop. And I'm an ex-cop because I have PTSD. I had to have that conversation with my sons I never told you why I left the force. The things that I experienced and the things that it does to our bodies. So I had to very quickly become the face of PTSD and say, this is what it looks like, this is how it feels like, and this is what we need to do. So there was
that was because of the impact that this terrible event was having on the people around you. So every day, Norman Rockwell occupants suddenly are dealing with something inconceivable.
Literally inconceivable. We were, our community didn't have a single stoplight. And for weeks and months, we were visited by the president within a couple of days. We were visited by every news crew. There was satellite trucks from all around the world. So then we started receiving semi-trucks full of outpouring. So I've gotten to witness the worst of humanity. Really just the worst of what can happen in a community and to families and stuff, and then also balance that with love that I've never seen before. And people often ask us, what do you think? How do you feel? So we had to come up with a slogan very quickly, and it was Sandy Hook. We choose love. We couldn't be angry. We couldn't, of course we were angry that these things happen. But the way to counter it was we chose love. But love's not enough, sadly, is we need better policies. So love doesn't drive policies. I'm sure a lot of viewers may have seen, if you do watch American news, please don't. Oh, God, please don't. But should you? Often, on the weekly school shooting thing, it becomes predictable. Mass shooting, news goes out, the politicians go, it's too early to talk about it. Thoughts and prayers to your community. Thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers didn't drive better gun legislation, so I decided to take to the streets in Washington and for 2 years really work towards better gun legislation, not trying to take people's guns away, but looking at how do we have responsible gun ownership, and let's start with that. Kids having access to weapons, mental health, background checks. Maybe a rifle with 100-round capacity isn't the best thing for deers. If that's the case, if that's what you need to be a good hunter, we need better target practice as well. So I spent 2 years on the streets with the politicians, getting to work with amazing politicians and President Obama to try to help change that. When I wasn't an activist, we were looking at the healing side of the community. So, we still lived there. The school stood there. How do we deal with that as a physical representation? How do we deal with that? And because I had an arts background, we became very active in the arts community. So Broadway reached out to us. They were only 45 minutes away, so within about a month, we put together a one-night show called From Broadway with Love. 600 of the top Broadway performers, directors, musicians, playwrights, stage craft people for one show. So I've seen, and it wasn't because they meant well, but they also had to do something. So that event impacted everybody to a level that they needed to do something, whether it was activism. All they knew how to do was sing and dance, and they do it really well. So through arts and healing, I started to realize that I was probably more in tune with sitting with the people that had had bad things happen to them than actually trying to, trying to convince a lawmaker that this is a bad policy wasn't working. Sitting with an individual that understands deep loss and grief just seemed to be something that I innately had that skill set. So I spent the next couple years as well traveling to every mass shooting afterwards. So whenever there would be a mass shooting, they would fly me. I would work with the community. Wow. So I've got to sit with so many people that have been impacted by such horrors and such amazing survivors. It's their stories that I carry with me. It's that resiliency that I need to do something in honor of what had happened. And I think we all can kind of understand that we don't really care so much about, and it's not that we don't care, but we have busy lives. So if there's a march for breast cancer, if there's something that we need, it's usually those of us that have been touched by something that we then go, actually, this is a really good cause that I want to donate my time, my passion, my energy towards.
Yeah. Can I ask you, like, if we look at, talking to a lot of people gives me a sort of range of, in particularly in Kintsugi, where people often have stories of challenge and growth and resilience and resurrection and healing, right? And I'm interested, but like the response on a macro level to events like the Sandy Hook and other horrific things tends to often be about expressing the pain in some sort of tangible way, right? In some way, it's like an avoidance strategy, right? Like sitting with the pain, is unbearably likely. So the entire community tends to jump onto these activities, and I feel like it's avoiding in some ways, right? And most of us, like these sort of community expressions of pain that turn into violence and trauma, that's a form, that's the same energy that leads to, on an individual level, leads to suicide and other things from my point of view. So it's almost like a social suicide, right, as opposed to a personal one. Yeah. And I'm thinking, after you've gone through all of these groups and had these one-on-one and small group connections and connections with communities in pain, the healing must be in those conversations and connections and expressions of empathy and of compassion, rather than, say, the policy, right? Policies might make the next one less likely, but it's not going to heal the last one, is it? Exactly. Is that fair?
Look, absolutely. It's such a valid point. I didn't realize it at the moment that sitting with others actually made me feel better. So I started to realize that, and it's that reciprocal healing. We're kind of that co-reflecting, co-healing, and I thought, well, this is exactly what I love to do, is to sit with, not fix, not heal, I have no answers. I can't save a person's life. I can't fix you. It's not possible, but boy, do I have the ability to sit and listen. Not when we talk about that non-judgmental of going, look, you have a right to be upset, angry. I will sit here and just listen. And some of the best work that I've ever done in my life is when Darren kept his mouth shut. I didn't offer any wisdom or, I was able to sit with and hear things that often others couldn't. The details. So we talk about, kind of trauma informed, which is an approach of keeping other people safe. So, on this show, of course, I won't share graphic details on the muck, the yucky, the yuck. It's not good for me. It's not good for you. Oh, the poor audience. I would never do that. However, sometimes those stories are really important. And I've actually witnessed mothers who've lost their children come with me to Washington and tell the politicians in a very untrauma-informed way the last few moments of their child's life. policymakers needed to hear those not trauma-informed stories as a way of going, you allowed for these situations to happen, dear politician, policymaker in this space. So I've seen such resilience, such passion, such anger, but it's that anger that's directed purposefully towards trying to stop other people from going, I don't want you to ever have to experience what I have felt. There's no reason that you should put your kid on a bus and ever have to worry, other than maybe a school bully, and then we can deal with that. So, I really feel for the young people. That wasn't my experience growing up, is realizing that we've allowed this just to be a normal thing in America, sadly, is the fact that, we have well over 25,000 people a year that die due to gun violence. And that's an accepted number. Now, that touches a lot of people, but we keep going, well, it's the Second Amendment, it's this, it's that, it's mental health, and I'm busy. And, we keep moving on until those things, eventually do touch and impact us. But it was that drive of sitting with people that I'm like, I told my wife, I said, I think this is what I'm meant to do. Marching hasn't got me anywhere. Talking to politicians definitely hasn't got me anywhere. If anything, we had quite a few gun legislation laws loosened as a way to kind of get back at us, going, well, if you think you're going to take my firearm away, we're going to just loosen it. So I'm like, well, that didn't really work. But sitting with people and doing nothing more than listening to that story is some of the best work that I ever did. So when we realized we weren't going to change the culture in America, I had multiple death threats. So my wife said, you know that you're going to, probably lose your life on this, topic, because I did multiple, people would show up at my speeches armed and text me and say, look, hey, wonder how many of these we're going to allow you to go before we stop you. So there was multiple deaths, and I was quite happy. I thought, well, if that's what fixes the problem, then I went, wait a minute. Yeah, so I'm actually I'm a slow learner. I'm a slow learner. I'm really, really a slow learner. But I eventually do learn. Thank goodness. Is the fact that I went, well, I did a little bit of research, and being a martyr, there's not a lot of career growth in that field.
So I thought it kind of peaks and then stops, right? So
yeah, and I could imagine a lovely park bench somewhere in Washington with a little brass plate, and I thought, well, exactly. I think I've got more to offer in that space. And we talked to our children and we said, look, what would you like to do? And they said, we'd like to go back to Australia. So the next day we were talking to travel agents, selling our home, selling our business. Yeah. And going, okay, we all got a second chance. So we all get to come back to the lucky country. Now I understand that term. I felt like I arrived as an immigrant, and I know it's a poor analogy, but we lost a lot of innocence and finances. My business went under. So to have to reinvent ourselves, arriving in Sydney with just the one bag of clothes. I left the emotional baggage, I think. Hopefully, still work in progress, but it was less. Yeah. So it was just carry on this time. So it wasn't cargo in that space. And then getting to reinvent ourselves and going, okay, what would we like to do? Living our best life. My decision was to go back to school to go, look, I would love to learn about what happens to people when they go through trauma, mental health. Even though I'd been a police officer for 12 years and daily was called out to deal with people that were having mental health challenges, never had one course in it. But I was always the expert to call, you call 911, 000, when these people are having a bad day. But I had never had a single course. So I didn't understand what had happened to me or people that I sit with. So I thought, here's a chance to go back to school and learn and really embed what I know to be true, and it's the learning that others taught me well before I went into the books. It was the survivors. It was the stories. Hundreds and hundreds of stories that sit with me, that educated me. This was a formality of just going, well, I'm going to get a little bit of extra book work, and then I'm going to challenge the book work by going, well, actually, that's not true. So it's been an amazing opportunity the past 11 years now to reinvent myself and come back to this country and go, what can I offer you in Australia? How can I protect myself? How can I protect our community? And how can I serve you? And how can I help people suffer better? Yeah, we're all going to suffer. We don't get out of this life without it. But how can we suffer better? And I've had a lot of great teachers. So if I can pass on some of that wisdom, that's, I think, my career path.
Well, that's I feel that we've gained a gift. So 11 years ago when you came back, right? Because your education, in fact, like you are, the PhDs and all of that, like it's not just education. You've excelled and contributed, right? And of course, some of the work on lived and living experience. And I'm fascinated to hear when you talked about listening and how there was reciprocity in that, right? There was a shared meaning gained from your sitting and holding space and listening with people suffering and having trauma and going through their process. And immediately what came to mind is that's, in some ways, lived experience or living experience, if we use that, it feels like magic. And in some ways, listening and yet communicating in that way is actually that magic, that very thing that makes lived and living experience massively important in the next level of, say, mental distress and community management of that fact, right? So, would that be
Absolutely.
something that you led into your work with this? And you talked about bringing what you had experienced into that. Has that held true as you went deeper?
I didn't even know that there was such a thing as, we call them peer support workers generally within mental health. And I had, so in my first hospitalization, never came across somebody. I kind of was really imagining what that would have looked like to have actually sat with somebody in that hospital space that's been in someplace similar, never exactly, but going, what would that have, that probably would have changed my life. I know it would be. So when I saw the first ad, because I'm living in Sydney, and I realized, I'm like, wow, it's expensive here. It's very expensive in Sydney. So as much as my Karma bank account, I think was definitely really well, and I was quite proud of that Karma bank account. When you talk about paying from your Karma account into your rental, no. So I'm like, well, I've got to get a job.
They're less receptive to that currency.
They are. They are. Look, maybe it's a cultural thing. I don't know, but we'll work on that. So I had to get that real person job, and I saw, looking through the want ads, and I saw this thing, and it said peer support worker, use your lived experience of trauma, and I'm like, there's actually a job that you want to go and highlight. Your trauma, your suicidality, your these deficits, which I was let go as a police officer because it was seen that when I said I was struggling with my memory, I wanted to work. They let me go because I was a broken tool. They had no idea how to support, fix. You serve no purpose no more for us. So it was a disposable role. And that was exactly what I was told. It's like, look, if you don't come back to work, there's a lot of young men that want to drive that shiny car with the lights and the gun and the badge. You're replaceable. So you either come back to work and knock this PTSD stuff off. But once I was diagnosed, I was cut loose. No support. And that's really what led to that initial thoughts of suicidality, was the fact that I would never be able to work again. If I did take my life, it was a financial decision that my kids would be better off. So these things made a lot of sense to me back then, and we know that that's not proper thinking. But that's the only information that you've got is, well, I will never work again. they're going to repossess the house, and your kids will never be able to go to college or have a home. If there was actually one solution that seemed to make sense. So to be able to come and then have a job, because I thought, that's right, 30 years ago I was told I would never work again. And here I am getting out the CV and going, wait a minute, I didn't graduate high school. I went straight into becoming a cop. So I'd never graduated high school. Wow. So to reinvent myself, study, go to job interviews and go, so I would like to be a mental health peer worker, and I would love to highlight all of the things that have happened to me, which is now seen as a positive. And they're like, "Oh, that's amazing. That's wonderful.
It's a job requirement." Yeah.
And it truly is. It's a criteria of that unique role set. Is it? And there's different lived and living experiences. So we have a great workforce now, and the greatest workforce that we currently have is in New South Wales is our suicide prevention peer workers. Yeah. So that role, that criteria of you being a suicide prevention peer worker means that you've had to have some kind of suicidal ideation thinking about it. Maybe there's been an attempt, or in some instances, you've been a carer of somebody. But you do have a lived or living experience around that topic. That's the criteria. What I have since learned, that's such an amazing thing to have such a powerful, really impactful thing that gives you the opportunity to come back into the workforce and contribute, which, like we were saying, that reciprocal thing of going, well, actually now I can pay my rent with the non-karma bucks, and I get to sit and listen and talk to people, and it seems to be helpful to them. Yeah, it's amazing. What I've discovered over the past few years, this is where my PhD work is, and my current training and education is, we need more than just those experiences. Yeah. So the peer workforce has been around for 15 to 20 years here in New South Wales. Yeah. And we know we do this innately. So we're wired for connection. So if we're suffering, we're just wired to talk or listen and connect. So we're often and I'm sure a lot of our people watching and stuff would identify that you've been an accidental counselor, an accidental peer. You found yourself in that space.
Yeah, would you say that throughout history there have been people who have been, say, community care peer workers, right? I call them often sort of community lodestones, right? They seem to be magnets for bringing people together to have, the right support for the right problem, right? But, modern society has invented things that are far outstripping that sort of natural support profile.
Yeah, and that's true. So we know we don't need to put. Sadly, research we need to justify everything and quantify and. Yeah. But we know innately that talking to somebody that cares, that there is a compassionate. There is healing in that space. We just haven't recognized how valuable it is. And we're working within a system that has been deficits focused for its entirety. So what is wrong with you is, as when I do lectures to the doctors and stuff, is going, often it is that first question is, so what's wrong with you? Is that how we start a conversation? I guess. God. So it's a deficits-focused workforce, and they are, the old school psychiatrists, and I keep this model here, is on my desk to remind me that, about 100 or so years ago, this was science. So this was this. You would go to school and learn. Actually, let's see again.
I'd love to feel your bumps.
Exactly. So, I can see you're depressed. Because you're sticking your finger in my temple. That was science. 100 years ago, I was a lunatic. By New South Wales definitions of mental health.
Because you were influenced by the moon, right? So that's why you were a lunatic.
Absolutely, and I'm all about reclaiming language. So I'm kind of liking that. I may take that language back, and I wear it as a badge of honor. So when you wear a badge and you work for a company, hospital, or whatever, and it says peer support worker, I know that all of my fellow colleagues know that says Darren Wagner, and then above it, peer worker, which in their eyes says mental health patient. I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
I'm proud to say this is what a mental health patient looks like, what a lunatic looks like. That we do have, when you meet me at my lowest, it might have been easy for that psychiatrist to say, well, you will never work again. Support, listening, I'm not anti-drugs, but, talk to us, first of all. So I've been really honored and privileged to help support this existing as well as rapidly growing emerging workforce around having proper training. How to sit with people, how to look at your story, because peer workers are often seen as storytellers. So we would be brought in to go, so Darren, can you tell us a really bad story? I'm like, which one do you want? I've got a warehouse of them. Which is now why, which is now for a PhD is not a bad thing to go, I've got a warehouse of trauma stories. But I also then know how to look at them. I inventory them. I put them in the warehouse. If there is a policy or training or need, I can go into that warehouse. I've done my stock take. I can pull that out. I can offer it up for consideration for research, education, listening with people. But so that I can continue to do this job, I know how to put that back. So that trauma story goes back into the warehouse. I go on to then have a positive evening and having lovely chats with people. But really trying to holding hope for the
beautiful.
Yes. Because that's really what I call peer work is really we hold hope for others. So you sit and listen to that story. I'm there not to give them hope. I'm there to hold it. Once they've done their recovery, they've found their aha moments, they're the experts in them. I could never sit with John, and in this session, I've only known you now 45 minutes and 37 seconds. I cannot be an expert in your life. There's no way. And I have to earn your trust before you're going to tell me a little bit more and a little bit more. So it's been an amazing journey to get to this point, and be given this amazing opportunity to support an existing but rapidly emerging workforce. To really contribute to our regional, rural, and remote communities in Australia, because bad things are going to always happen. Our bushfires, floods, whether it's a man-made disaster or a natural disaster, we all get to see it, and it will continue to happen. So how do we do that suffering better?
So you've raised so many points I want to explore, but let's see first of all, you just mentioned how do we do it better? And earlier on, you talked about post-traumatic growth, right? The idea that there is an after trauma, right? And of course, I'm fascinated by the idea of that being on a community basis, right? So, certain people, the lived and living experience can be also the guides for people towards post-traumatic growth, right? On a group basis. So the community itself can find a way to support, and through that support, become positive after a tremendous negative. Do you feel like that's a real thing?
Oh, look, absolutely. Like I said, I didn't graduate high school. I don't recommend trauma as a way of growing. So just for the audience, that's a disclosure. There are better ways to gain education and training and pathways into this field.
Intentionality can cut the corners of that one.
Absolutely. But for many of us that have had that happen to us, no fault of our own, it's just, I used to go out and yell at the cloud gods, going, look, enough. Please stop. How much more can I can't. I keep trying to escape the world. I keep hiding, and the world keeps on. The universe reaches out and taps me and goes, "Hey, you thought you were safe?" It's kind of like it's a game of hide and seek. Darren runs around the world, and where's Darren? Not where's Waldo, but where's Darren? And the universe eventually finds you and taps you and goes, "Hey, here's a reminder that you're human. You can't expect the world to change for you, not happen to you." So it was, I was very blessed actually when I was in the States because of this event in Sandy Hook. A great Zen Buddhist monk by the name of Thich Nhat Hanh, who massively, I didn't realize who he was when I first studied with him, but he received the Nobel Peace Prize from Martin Luther King Jr. So to study with, and I was quite skeptical because I really was, actually I was rude when I first met him because I thought, he said, I'm going to teach you the art of suffering. And I said, look, I don't know what you can teach me. You're not married. You don't have kids. You live in this monastery. You probably don't pay your own electric bills. I said, I see little monks carrying your tea around for you all day. So I was rude and condescending, thinking that this person had nothing to offer me through a story to teach me about suffering. And he just smiled. He was very short. He looked like Yoda. Amazing, amazing person. But my first impression was, you look like Yoda. And always smiling. So I don't trust anyone that smiles that much, especially when they're going to teach me about suffering. He said, tomorrow I will share my story. And as you can very well appreciate, just like, Kintsugi Heroes, is the fact that it's those sharing the stories which humbled me to the work that he was doing in Vietnam, around the Vietnam War and stuff. So I was humbled and I was put in my place. It's been very, very life-changing to have sat with so many people and then bring that wisdom back to me, and then embed it into my training for hundreds and hundreds of workers who will sit, because a lot of our suicide prevention work now is led by peer workers. So it used to be we were just an add-on to mental health services, to now we have spaces called safe havens within New South Wales, which are peer-led services. So it's a space that people can go instead of the ED. It's an alternative to our emergency room to talk to somebody that has been somewhere similar. So you come into a very home-like place, often with nice coffee, safe space, and just have a chat, have a yarn, sit with somebody, and if nothing more, I can just sit and listen, or I can just sit with you. I can make you a cup of coffee, and we can just sit. There doesn't have to be a conversation. It's led by that person. I have no agenda in the work that I do other than you tell me. You tell me about you, not what the doctors have told you. I know that that's often, one view, but my doctor, again, psychiatrist, you will never work. You tell me about you. I get to meet people where they're at, which is often at the lowest point in their life. Hearing some very traumatic stories. So there's a lot of what we call vicarious trauma in this space. So being close to trauma will impact us. I honor that. I've reframed it because I have an awareness that sitting close to people that have survived and become so resilient through their journeys and through their trials, I call so it's I call it vicarious resilience. So I get to reframe how when I sit with people, it fills my bucket up. So most people would go, so what do you do, Darren? That typical thing. So what's your name? What do you do at a party? If I'm honest, if I don't want to talk about what I'm doing, I'll say I'm an accountant. Usually people, well, they might ask me to do their tax return, which you don't want to do. I can guarantee my wife. But if I'm honest with a person, I say, look, I work in suicide prevention, predominantly training. So there's a bit of a pause and then consideration. They're like, that must be hard. And I'm like, thank you. It really is, because I have to work with the government. I have to work with funding bodies. I have to work with policies. That's hard. The beauty of the job is sitting with people. The stigma, So the hard part's working with the governments and the funders and the so-called experts, the second generation of phrenology people that are out there.
So there's so much to explore in this space, right? The idea that as we, as lived experience gains currency, acceptance, and position, right, and begins to explore its role, there's tension between, say, clinical and communities, a non-clinical world. And you can understand that. It's like siblings sort of arguing about, the last, fudge on the table, right? But, the system is taking ownership of an area it doesn't support, right? Which is the that sort of community. And the statistics are not responding, right? We've had sort of 20 years of focus on improving statistical, elements of suicide and domestic violence and mental distress and situational distress. How do we help the system? You've been an advocate and also a peer worker. How do you think we help the clinical world to let go and to start, allowing some of the wisdom of the human side, gain some sway?
Okay, and that's such a valid point, because and this is why I really enjoyed studying Australian mental health history. To go from, like I said, being a lunatic 100 years ago. And when I first came to Australia too, I thought, wow, Australia is really compassionate. So my first impression of Australian mental health was quite compassionate, because there was these great architectural sandstone buildings alongside the rivers. I thought, wow, water views, great architecture, sandstone buildings. Wow, Australia really gets it, until I realized they didn't. That it was, 100 years ago, me, as a lunatic, was not allowed to travel upon the King's Highway. That was a law. So we had to put the hospitals beside the river so that you could bring me on a barge to the hospital and then into a tunnel into the hospital. I went, oh, okay, here we go again. The experts. So my take on it is, because I've had the great misfortune of being in very misfortunate places most of my life, I've learned that during chaos there's often opportunities. And I think it was Winston Churchill that said, "Never let a good kind of disaster or chaos or thing happen." Never pass up on that opportunity to. And so I've leapt at that. And so every time that there's been a disaster within Australia, I've gone, I happen to know something, a little something. And I challenge the system, going, well, do you think it would be okay if I went out with the responding mental health team to that community? Oh, no. They're trained professionals. I'm like, well, I kind of happen to know a little something about how communities get impacted by disasters, man-made, natural. So having to challenge that stigma with compassion, and then getting a seat at the table, and sometimes it's a tokenistic seat. And I say, take it. So you're at least invited to the table. And then I sit quietly and wait for an opportunity to then go, well, Darren, you've been awfully quiet. What do you think? Here's that opportunity to go, well, actually, and I'm not pointing the finger at the system, at people. I'm just going, you know what might be, and I'm just kind of curious, what do you think? And here comes this opportunity. So the pandemic was the next big thing, which I really elevated. So I took advantage of COVID because it wasn't my first rodeo. So when I was a paramedic back in America, I was a paramedic during HIV, so during the AIDS crisis. Wow. Yeah. So I understood how panic, fear grips people, how we become really, survival instinct and stuff, because we don't know how this is transmitted. And so I've seen that. So I'm like, well, actually, no, I'm not afraid of a pandemic. And so you would be willing to work with? Absolutely. So I helped create the first COVID positive locked mental health unit in Sydney. So how do we balance that need with still having that lived experience? So having those opportunities to step up. And now suicide is one of our biggest ones, because as you highlighted, we've thrown millions and millions and millions into it with almost no result. It kind of ebbs and flows, but it's still not acceptable, and we're not doing a good job at all. So they're like, okay, we need peer-led, lived experience-led research workforce, but that does threaten the other professional workforces, because they've gone to school for 20 years, all of this, to become experts. So I honor that. And I've also tried to break the stigma down between lived experience and professionals by saying we all have a lived and living experience. by nature of living, anyone lived through the pandemic, as you would understand, loss and grief, we all have a lived experience. My role in hiring and supporting this workforce is hiring lived expertise. So I take people that have that lived experience. I then support them through training, education, to develop, reflect on that story, and so that we can then gain a few skills which doesn't threaten the other professionals. And then we also honor, I know that you're not in an identified role in this team, but however, I know that you wouldn't have joined this suicide prevention workforce or mental health if you, and then the clinician will come over and say, can I tell you something? And here it is. We all have experienced stuff. We all have a role to play in mental health, suicide prevention. We all do. And so the days of we're the experts, you're not, this, I have lived experience, but you don't know. So we need to have these honest conversations, and that's what I really appreciate. Even just having this opportunity to kind of to start these conversations, to kind of break down those stigmas between workforces, between communities, by going, look, we all suffer. We will all suffer. How do we do it better? How do we support each other and really lift each other up so that when we do, not if, but when life taps us on the shoulder and said, I found you, and rats, here we go again. That we have good supports in place for our community because, the impact of a suicide, loss, grief, it's that person, the family, workplaces, communities, and sometimes the world. So, our event in Sandy Hook, it rippled around the world. I'll kind of end on a little bit of a positive. I started out earlier by saying I wanted to be an actor. There was a play written about the tragedy in our community, and I know that sounds horrific. Because when I first heard it as well, that someone wanted to write a play about this, I was horrified, and I love theater. I eventually did make it back to theater. So this play was written because myself and my wife, we were interviewed, not about the event, but how a community has resilience after the fact. So I'm now forevermore embedded into a play called 26 Pebbles, which is a story about our community's resilience. And I think the playwright contacted me a couple months ago and said there's been well over 200 people that have played me on stage around the world. So that I can then continue to tell that story on stages around the world. Often they get the costuming wrong. So if there's any directors out there that are wanting to bring the show to Sydney, please consult me with, they always put me in plaid. I don't know why. I don't wear plaid, but just because I come from Ohio, there's always this assumption. But it's that storytelling. So it's been nice, and I get contacted usually about once a month by a director, usually from high schools, saying, "Look, I've got a student who's playing you. Do you have any advice?" I'm like, absolutely not. I'm still looking. I'm still a work in progress. Once I've mastered how to play Darren, I'll add that to the script. But until then, just have fun with it. It's been an amazing journey, and it's not to take away from what we all go through or will go through and what we've been through. It's how do we do it better? How do we have those honest conversations that don't jeopardize our work, our identity? So by seeing me as somebody that, yes, when you meet me at my lowest, it would seem that I'm hopeless. With the right supports, with a little bit of time, we all have the potential to grow.
I absolutely, and it's a wonderful point to think. Just a couple of final questions. The idea that you mentioned identity earlier as being, so the idea that identity is a key thing to understand, to healing, and of course to be prepared to have some resilience. What do you think is important for, say we're talking to parents or young people who are thinking about identity? What elements should they concentrate on, do you think, that will give them a good chance to manage some of those troughs that they may encounter?
Oh, John, boy, but I'm waiting to. I may have to do a book because I'm still learning. So obviously, and I'm still very lucky to go. I'm still a father, so I still get to mess up and I still get to course correct. But
Right.
if I was to look at any one thing, and this was through my own learning, is that we fed our sons, our two sons, the same food, the same shows. We took them to the same parks. And we were quite surprised that they became very different individuals. Surprise, surprise. So it's that thing of trying to imprint what we want people to be hasn't worked, at least for me. I mean, if someone else out there knows how to do it, really allowing them to discover who they want to be and allowing them to make those mistakes of going, yes, you want to be an actor. Let's explore that. Supporting people to try on those many hats, going, oh, you want to be a policeman, you want to be a fireman, you want to be a try on the hats. Don't get stuck into one identity, because there isn't the one. We constantly, thank goodness, we grow through support, sometimes lack of opportunities. So sometimes the identities we take on may because there is no other opportunities. So we go, I've been a factory worker. I come from a long line of farmers back in America. So probably 4 or 5 generations of sharecroppers. We never owned land, but we always farmed other people's farms. So you go, well, what's my identity? Well, I'm a farmer. Well, is that true? Is that the only thing that I was allowed to do? When I was in high school, if you would have said, oh, we would love for you to go and do a PhD, well, that wasn't in my worldview. I grew up in the military. It's like, if you want to see the world, join the military. You want an education, join the military. That's what my identity would have been. So, I love these cultures where you go backpacking and you can go, you're going to take a gap year and you find yourself. The world is rapidly and constantly and will forevermore be, in flux. How we can have one identity at any one given time. I'm blessed now because I do have a giant hat rack, metaphorically, back behind me, that now I do get to go, well, I can sit with clinicians and go, yeah, I know what it's like to work as a medic. I know what it's like to work frontline. I know what it's like to work as a clinician. I know. So it helps me to be that bridge between those different identities, workforces. We're the one. We're the we have the education. We have this, and I've had to challenge that. Going, my identity is based on 30 years of research by being in the system, by being restrained. I've been put in isolation. I know what it's like. Give people a chance to explore. I've had so many opportunities, and they felt like failures along the way. So you go, I didn't get to finish being a policeman. I didn't get to finish being an actor. I didn't. Eventually, all of my worlds collided. So if there was any one thing, the world is constantly changing. Dream, literally give yourself that freedom, and hopefully as a community we can support our young people to imagine being whatever. Let them try. We do when they're playing, little dress up, and they can put the fire hats on us, and we like that. But it's funny, as they get a little bit closer to high school, we start directing. And no matter where we direct them, we still can't protect them. Being a helicopter parent, I realized that just sending them to school, it changed my life by not allowing and I wouldn't be here if I was to boil it down. If we had a good mental health system in place where there wasn't bullying in the school, because this is the young man that committed that act in our community had been bullied his whole life. So his identity was formed by this negative, never picking him for the football team, never picking him, never sitting with him at lunch, calling names. Sometimes we create identities and then we wonder why. Why did these? As a society, we have to support. Even just school bullying. I wouldn't be here if we had a better school bullying place. I don't know what I would be doing. And it's not that I don't like doing this, but here's where I am. Here's where you're at. Our paths have crossed tonight. I don't regret that. But I think that,
I'm glad.
and this is where I love. Look, I do love my life. It's one of those things you go, well, but I trade it. Well, I don't get that option. But boy, do I get to learn to enjoy it. Absolutely.
So I love it, and I think it's wrongly assigned to Marcus Aurelius, but the statement, pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice, right? And I think in some ways, your work on lived and living experience and peer support, and and the implications that has for ongoing resilience in the community, and of course, the fight against mental distress and suicide and other issues. I think there's a real pathway that you're blazing for us. So thank you, Darren. That's been an incredible opportunity and a wonderful privilege to hear some of that story tonight. And I'm keen to hear more of it whenever I can. So thank you so much for sharing so much tonight.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for anybody that takes the time to listen to the story.
Absolutely. The one or two out there that give it a go.
Absolutely. Even if it's one. I mean, if there happens to be two, if there's a second one, absolutely, that's even better. But sometimes it's just that one that we will never know. That and just to come back to your point, it's like suffering. We don't get a choice initially. But at some point, so we're going to suffer. And the people that I get to meet, I'm like, you get to be angry and miserable as long as it serves you. But when it stops doing that, so when you go, look, I don't want to live this way. And then that's when peer support comes in and goes, okay, I can walk with you. Until then, absolutely. Be mad at the world, be miserable, put the cover over your head and go, I don't want to get out of bed today. That's fine, and that's a normal. We don't get an initial response. We don't get control over how our body reacts to stress and these things. But in time, I hope that we can all find a way to support each other.
Yeah. Thank you again, Darren. Absolutely, and I look forward to reading and being a part of further your work down the track. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Kintsugi Heroes. Thank you to Colin Lilly for permission to use Broken as our theme music for this series. If you enjoyed this conversation, share the podcast with a friend and let us know by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support Kintsugi Heroes and the stories we share, head to kintsugiheroes.com.au and follow the instructions to make a tax-deductible donation. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.